Don't you know, they're talking about a revolution. Sounds whisper. Don't you know, talking about a revolution. Sounds like a whisper. While they're standing in the welfare lines, crying at the doorsteps of those armies of salvation, wasting time in the unemployment lines, sitting around waiting for a promotion. Don't you know, talking about a revolution. Sounds whisper. Poor people gonna rise up, get their share. Poor people gonna rise up and take what's theirs. Don't you know you better run, 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 run. Oh, I said you better run, 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 run. 'Cause finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Yes, finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Oh no, talking about a revolution. Oh, while they're standing in the welfare lines, crying at the doorsteps of those armies of salvation, wasting time in the unemployment lines, sitting around waiting for a promotion. Don't you know, talking about a revolution. Sounds whisper. And finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Yes, finally the tables are starting to turn, talking about a revolution. Oh no, talking about a revolution. Oh no, talking about a revolution. Oh no.
Good afternoon, Democrats. I'm Vincent Jones with the California Democratic Party. Thank you for joining us for our conversation about post-election organizing. We're going to jump right into it. And first, I want to introduce a friend and a comrade in the struggle, Jennifer Epps Addison, who is the co-president of the Center for Popular Democracy, who is going to share a little bit about her thoughts on post-election organizing before we get into a panel conversation. So Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you so much, Vincent, and thank you, everyone. I am bidding you, joyful greetings and blessings, and thank you for everything you did. I know that right now you're not just celebrating so many of the incredible victories we had here in California, but that many of you were deep and significant parts of the victories we had across the country. While there's a lot on my mind post-election, and while the voters have decided and this election is done, right, we still do not have a president who has conceded. And so I understand that people may be stuck in a feeling of limbo. So I want to remind us what we did together. What we did together was defeated one of the greatest threats to democracy in modern history. What we did together was yet again, for the second time in a row, elect the most diverse, most racially diverse, most gender diverse, most sexuality diverse Congress in US history. What we did together is we elected, the first Black Congresswoman from Missouri. We helped to pass policies that will put people first, harm reduction policies like the decriminalization of drugs in places like Oregon. Because here's the story about California, which is so beautiful, is that, when the story of this election is written, we will have found out that tens of millions of phone calls, of donations, of volunteer time, of texts came from the state of California, were exported from the state of California into the key geographies that were needed to win this election. And so we get to celebrate fully, not just our own victories here, but the victory that we helped to bring this country. So I want to thank everybody for your actions. At the Center for Popular Democracy, we knew from the beginning, that we had to be very clear about our strategy to defeat Donald Trump. And so we began to look at the numbers about 3.5 years ago, pretty much right after the election, the inauguration of Trump, to figure out what is the pathway forward and how could we deal and manage with the immense amount of suppression, intimidation, misinformation, disinformation that we knew were going to be thrown at voters in 2020 in order to maintain power. What we realized as we did that research and we looked at the electoral map and how you win the electoral college is that we didn't actually have to change a single white person's vote from 2016 to 2020 in order to win the election. In fact, in states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Florida and Georgia and Pennsylvania and Arizona and Minnesota, where we focused our efforts, there were enough unregistered but eligible Black and Brown voters to win these elections and to win these states, and thereby the electoral college many times over. In the case of Florida, almost 10 times over. In the case of Michigan, 4 times over, but many times over. And it's, the reason why I bring up that strategy is because many of you will say, well, how did you know this? Well, how were you smart? No, actually, that has been the strategy here in California, right? The strategy of bringing more and more eligible people into the electorate, of mobilizing the votes of communities of color, in Indigenous communities, AAPI communities, Black and Latinx communities, has been the strategy of building a more progressive California, California where people have more of the things that they need. It's why California was one of the first places in the country to be able to pass a $15 an hour minimum wage. Well, that and the incredible force of labor here. But it's why we have been able to govern and legislate in a way that provides the rest of the country with, the real ideas, the ability to see big ideas in action. And so, I told you all, right, that this election is done, and it is. The story of 2020 will be ultimately that Black and Indigenous and Brown folks defeated a racist authoritarian, overcame all of his suppression. But there are some lessons to learn here, right? This story is a story of mass turnout, both for people who supported Biden, but also for people who supported Trump. I think it's really important for us to understand that while Black communities are the strongest and most supportive base of the Democratic Party, Joe Biden lost ground, not just in Black communities, but in every other demographic, racial demographic, to Donald Trump in this election from Hillary Clinton in 2016. And in some ways, right, this election was much closer than it had to be because we didn't max out. Although we had record turnout in many of these communities, we didn't max out the turnout except for in places like Georgia, right? Where you had 128% of eligible voters voting in Atlanta. So let me tell you about the places we did max out and why. And this is really the story of community organizing. In all of these places, all of the places I just named, there were very small investments from the sort of democratic infrastructure. On the issue of criminal justice, for example, Donald Trump spent $6 million on digital ads specifically targeting Black communities. Joe Biden on the issue of criminal justice spent around $8,000. And so he seeded the ground on criminal justice, a key issue where our people had been in the streets rising up all summer, where clear demands had been made about divesting from harmful infrastructure and investing in community care, right? Where folks like Community Coalition and Dignity and Power Now and Black Lives Matter LA, right, had been really helping to lead the way and show us the way. And yet, that ground was seeded. And what we heard in places like Milwaukee and Philadelphia, where Black voters identified that they chose to vote for Trump, is that the message that the 94 crime bill and the impact that it had on their lives, and the Democrats' refusal to sort of deal with that issue, and Trump, particularly the First Step Act, was a motivating force in their switching votes. And I think we have to really analyze that for what it's worth and say, yes, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority, the most democratic, right, are Black folks, followed by other folks of color. And Joe Biden did get, upwards of 2/3 of those votes, right? And in the case of Black women, 91%. But that in the case in which Democrats lost ground with our core base, it wasn't a case of being too radical that lost us key ground. It could have been determinative ground, but it was a case of us not speaking to the material interests and needs of our key base and our key constituencies. And so what that means moving forward as I wrap up here is that, Joe Biden is going to inherit, a country in which 62 plus million people will have been filling out unemployment claims, where the economy is in shambles, where we are going to be in the middle of a very, continued spread of a pandemic with a healthcare infrastructure that is not up to the task. And he's going to be facing a Congress in which there, potentially will be able to obstruct much of what he wants to do. It will be up to us as Californians to help demonstrate the validity of some of the big ideas that we know will be necessary to help our people live through this pandemic, more of our people survive this pandemic, but also to build a real community where all of us can thrive. That is what those organizations who are on the ground 365 days a year to transform the landscape, to reclaim the blue wall, to build a new South in Georgia and even in Florida and even in Texas, where winning becomes infinitely more possible. That is what they've been building towards all of these years, not just an electoral victory, but a real transformation of our communities. And we won't get it at the federal level. It will have to come from the imagination and the will and the belief of Democrats like us here in California. Thank you all so much.
Woo, okay, I'm fired up and ready to go. Before we let Jennifer go back to organizing around the country, I wanted to ask a quick follow-up question. You mentioned a number of states that were doing the work on the ground to organize unregistered voters of color. Can you say a little bit about maybe one or two of those organizations and the type of work that they did so that people watching today can get an idea of what we might be able to do here in California? You're on mute.
All right, absolutely. So one of the most incredible stories is several of the organizations that were key difference makers in some of these Midwestern elections didn't even exist 4 years ago. So in Wisconsin, Black Leaders Organizing Communities and Leaders Igniting Transformations, both in Milwaukee, they together sent over 2 million text messages, made over 1 million phone calls, knocked over 200,000 doors, and really engaged a mass amount of those voters. And they didn't exist 4 years ago. So they have spent 2 years before this election on the doors doing silent canvases, really asking people what they want. They did a blueprint for the city, which they took thousands of residents in the most criminalized zip codes in the city and asked them, what do you need to see happen in order to thrive in this city, and wrote a blueprint. So they had a real trust that they built through the community. And also, I think the other thing to note is that they transformed the political alignment in the city. So in Milwaukee, the county executive is a Black man under 35. The county board chair is a Black woman under 35. The president of the city council is a Black man under 35. And as you all know, the lieutenant governor of Wisconsin is a Black man under 35. And these organizations help to run the campaigns that put them in office, that then were able to administer a fair election despite the fact that Republicans were trying to suppress them. I know here in California, we saw those voting boxes. Well, imagine if you had an entirely Republican state legislature, those random voting boxes would be like, what would be happening everywhere. So that's what was happening in Wisconsin, but changing the organizing that changed the local landscape then gave rise to the possibility of what is now changing the federal landscape. I think Georgia's the other example. Many of you know of the New Georgia Project. It was started by Stacey Abrams. It's now one of our affiliates run by Nsé Ufot. And, they really went full out. So their organizing was about leave nobody behind. And so first of all, they made sure that people who are barred because they have felony convictions had a place in their organizing. They built an entire program around it to help those folks engage their people in the election. They also engaged strippers, right? So some of y'all saw themselves on the polls. And it was highly controversial, but it also like helped skyrocket clicks about the election and election information. And then the other thing they did is they engaged gamers. Gamers are one of the largest, potentially untapped electoral bases in the country. And more than 50% of gamers are Black, are people of color and women. And so they had a whole engagement series on Twitch, and as well as many other gaming platforms that was really targeted at engaging gamers in the election with really high results in Georgia.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. We're definitely going to have you back for more conversations, because just in this last 15 minutes or so, I feel like I've been, my soul has been enriched. It's definitely good to see you. Thank you again for being with us.
And shout out to all my Liberty Hill alumni. Like Liberty Hill welcomed me to California, taught me about all the best organizing, Scope and Community Coalition and ACE and all of the, I learned so much from that family, and you're all here. So shout out to Liberty Hill and love you guys.
All right, love you too, Jennifer. Thank you so much. So Jennifer and I actually met when we both worked, met through Liberty Hill, and I have the honor of introducing someone else who was used to run Liberty Hill, which is not a partisan organization, but Jennifer mentioned, so Jen mentioned, so I want to mention it as well. First, I'm going to introduce Ada Briceño. Ada is the chair of the Orange County Democratic Party and co-president of Unite Here. We have two other panelists, but first I just want to ask Ada for about 3 minutes or so, just to tell us about any, an example of organizing that you did or were a part of outside of an election and the impact that it had in that community.
Outside of an election. Yeah, so I think every day is an organizing opportunity that leads up to whether it's unionization or a political campaign. So, you know, the organizers, by the way, we represent 32,000, you know, cooks, room attendants, dishwashers across Arizona and most of Southern California. And, you know, we take an opportunity, every single contract fight, every single non-union struggle that we have is an organizing opportunity. Whether we win or lose, we are searching out for those people who have stepped it up to the plate. Those folks that we saw a glimmer, you know, of desire to see some change, and we, you know, ID them, we develop them, we recruit them, and train them. And we believe that if we're not doing that every waking moment, we are losing an opportunity to build our overall movement. There's so many campaigns, there's so many great issues that we have across, you know, the social justice or the democratic values that we have, that in order for us to win, we've got to develop leaders who are willing to run those campaigns and recruit others to do the great work. So you name it, it's what we do. It's we don't. There's no campaign that goes on if there's no organizing. Like I said, our victory is not, you know, the win, but it's the people that we've recruited, trained, and then what we do is make sure that you know, we are looking at our stars. We're looking at everybody and really putting together a training plan for them long term and developing them. And it's, you know, it's up to us if they've already shown interest in one particular campaign. It's up to us to educate them, to get them excited. They want to be a part of something bigger. I want to know that my talents are put to good use for something bigger than me or my union. And so that's what we're looking for in every recruit that we have in organizing. And it's long lasting. It takes a long time. I know I'll have an opportunity to talk about Arizona at some point. But, you know, it took us 13 years. We've been working in Arizona for 13 years, leaving roots, building, you know, strength with not only our members, but also our community groups. And it takes a while. Nevertheless, we can make good strides in every cycle we have. And then, also being thoughtful about the community that you're trying to organize, meeting them where they're at, hearing what their interests are, and also, and also getting innovative and creative with those communities, having town hall meetings in the middle of, and off-year elections and on-year elections, right? To build that base, to recruit, to see people face to face and see, what they can gain and what we can gain from having them be a part of our organizing and moving forward. So Vincent, I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but that's what I got.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. And before we get into our conversation, I want to let everyone know that there will be time for Q&A. You can put Q&A or questions in a Q&A box, and we'll get to it towards the end of the conversation. Next, I want to introduce an iconic LGBT organizer and progressive movement leader and a personal hero to me. She also organized a large resistance team that helped to flip Arizona, the one and only Tori Osborne. Tori, can you start by answering the same question I asked Ada?
Absolutely. It's hard to follow Ada without talking about what just happened in Arizona, because I think there's a lot of lessons to plumb. And so I'm just going to quickly say my team of 88 people from many parts of my life, but Team TO Resist and Rise is the name of the organization, went to Arizona because Unite Here, working with Central Arizonans for a Sustainable Economy and Lucha and other local groups, we're doing canvassing, we're doing door knocking, and most campaigns were not doing that. And because of the COVID safety regulations, and believe me, they were really tough, really strict, we felt safe and went to Arizona and door knocked. And it was plugging into this, what Ada just talked about, this 13 years. I mean, let's talk about the long strategy that the right has organized to take over has used to take over the Republican Party, has used to build the people, the Trump machine. Trump came in and took advantage of, an existing base that had been being organized for 40 years. So the long game is what we have to start thinking about. And that I hope is, a key part of what this conversation is. But the specific question you asked was, what is an example of organizing, sort of post-electoral organizing? And the first thing that came to mind, I want to just quickly say, the first time that I'm a social movement person. I've been involved in building the organizations that have built and sustained various social movements, primarily the LGBT movement, and then economic and racial justice in recent years, Liberty Hill and so forth. But the moment that that the Obama campaign sort of magnetized me to become a super volunteer, it's where I met Rusty Hicks actually, was when it felt like a social movement. When a political campaign, for the first time in my life, I mean, since Bobby Kennedy when I was 17 and I wasn't involved in it, felt like a social movement. It had the energy, the dynamism, the momentum of a social movement. So I got involved in the Obama campaign. 2008, Prop 8 passed at the same time that Obama won. Obama won in a landslide, and my rights were, lost. And it was many of the same communities that had voted for Obama that voted in favor, against marriage equality, voted for Prop 8. And so in my view, without going down the rabbit hole of analysis, the campaign, the No on 8 campaign was lacking in a lot of ways. And so a bunch of us, Lisa Powell and Mike Bonin and I, got together and created what the Courage campaign picked up, created Camp Courage. You know about it, you were part of it. Camp Courage took the lessons of the Obama campaign, which to me were, you can create activists, you can create a movement from individual activists who are strangers to each other by teaching sort of movement building skills, coalition building, but you start with storytelling. You start with your own individual opening up and connection. What motivates you? And so we took all the lessons of Camp Obama, we call it the full Hillel, after Rabbi Hillel's, if I'm not for myself, who am I? If I'm only for myself, what am I? If not now, then, which was kind of the basis of Camp Obama. And created Camp Courage, trained 1,600 activists, and frankly, in my view, changed the nature of the LGBT movement, opened it up to cross-racial organizing, which the right wing had mobilized so well to pass Prop 8. They had all the churches, the Mormon church, the Catholic church, the right-wing evangelical churches of color had all gotten together and organized in their communities. They out-organized us because they knew how to organize where people lived. And that was in their faith-based communities. So that was an example of taking something from a political campaign, moving back into a movement and improving the LGBT community, which was sort of devolving into, frankly, racist BS after the Obama campaign. And what the key thing here is take organizing skills, coalition building skills, community organizing, meet people where they are, and take it into political campaigns or take it into the long-term organizing that needs to happen.
All right. And I saw Susan Pfeiffer ask a question, are there any other Camp Obama alums in the group? So please post in the chat if you are a Camp Obama or a Camp Courage alum. Just make sure the two says to panelists and attendees so everybody sees it. Next, I want to introduce our final panelist, the one and only Rusty Hicks, the chair of the California Democratic Party. Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, Vincent. It's really hard to follow you and then Jennifer and then Ada and then Tori. So I really could just say what they said times 2 or 3, and I feel like that should be good enough for today. But certainly it's great to be here with all of you. I was thinking about an example to your question of where the electoral was continued, the organizing work that Ada was speaking to continued on well past Election Day. And I was thinking back to 2016, in which we, when I was at the LA County Federation of Labor, we were constantly, and still are in many ways, confronting the question of having cheap housing and good jobs. We're always put into this place of you can't have both. You can have a roof overhead, but you probably can't have good jobs connected to that roof overhead. So the labor movement in Los Angeles came together with community allies and qualified a ballot measure JJJ, gathered the signatures, got it to the ballot, and ultimately passed it. That measure said that when developers come in and want a zoning change on a piece of property, that ultimately increases the value of that property. In the city of LA, they're going to be required to include affordable housing as part of that project and hire local workers at good living wages. Now it's great in concept. It was passed by the voters with 64% of the vote. And the tendency was to say, we won. Outstanding. Let's move on to the next issue. And the reality is that the policy that we passed is only as good as the work we were willing to put into seeing it implemented. And so there was tons of work ensuring and organizing around the policy provisions, not the statute, but the specific policies by which that policy would be implemented. There was the questions of the personnel that we would put in place that would oversee this program. There was the question of the community groups that we would ally with that would actually enforce this policy. And so there ended up being another year's worth of work to ensure that what we had passed was actually brought to fruition through some of the same organizing that we had done in order to get this measure to the ballot and to get it passed. I think the point is that when we pass something, when we elect someone, we have done half of the job. The rest of the job happens after election day. We have to do two things. We have to push our partners to do the right thing, to protect them when they do, and to hold them accountable when they don't. And you don't do that by knocking on doors, making phone calls, and casting your vote, being successful, and then walking away. I believe organizing is a year-round challenge, and it's something that we have to continue to do as a party.
All right, so let's get into a conversation. I want to first ask a question to you, Ada. You talked about Arizona and the 13-year campaign to flip Arizona, but you are also in Orange County, and we have made incredible progress in Orange County. Can you say a little bit about the organizing that went into that, and give any suggestions to those of us who live in blue parts of California about how we might be able to be supportive to folks who are in purple or red districts?
Thank you, Vincent. I really love that question. I just want to say that I know that we're still, I know that we, we're not successful with Congressman Harley Ruda, and that we're still watching Congressman Gil Cisneros, right? And I know that we will take that seat back in 22. We are organizing and we're moving forward, but we had tremendous victories on the local level. I just want to let you know that we endorsed 96 people to run for office. We had double the number of candidates in 2020 versus 2016 or 2018. And we won 55% of those folks. So 53 of them. We now have a plurality as of this election of school board members, which is incredible. And we took seats not only in the blue parts of Orange County, we took seats in the red parts of Orange County, like Aliso Viejo, where we now have a majority, or Huntington Beach, a very, very difficult area where we took two Democrats. So now we're tied with Republicans. And in the city of Santana, every single seat we ran, we won. So we now have a very progressive mayor, and there's now a majority of Democrats there. And we have the first Muslim woman of color who won as mayor in the city of Irvine. And we also won 2 city council seats. So, and 2 Senate seats. So we're very proud of the work that we're doing locally. It has been, there's been a lot of work that has been done before Trump. In Orange County, people were steadily trying to move forward. But the influx of energy that we got after Trump I think it was a perfect storm for Orange County, for Orange County and what Republicans were about to see. So I really believe it's the meshing of the two, the folks that have been in the trenches for a long time, trying to, turn Orange County blue, and the new folks. And really it's engaging and giving everybody a seat at the table that's crucial. That makes us win, right? So creating, so for example, we created a group called the Harnessing Power of Women that brought in a whole bunch of women that now actually got elected to city council, to different city councils. So we feel very proud of that. But we also have, a Black leaders roundtable. And we have 2 Black leaders that got elected, one to a school board and one to a city council. So we feel very proud of opening doors, dragging people inside, right? And saying, we need to hear your voice and we need to know what's important to you so we can build this party. And it's really remembering that we've got to figure out how to keep and how to speak as much as possible. I know we're very diverse and we have a lot of different interests, but but how do we keep in speaking with the same voice when going and trying to flip seats and trying to organize a community? We have an upcoming now we have to replace Michelle Steele, right? Who took the congressional seat, and that's a very difficult seat to take, right? So we have to bring all of Orange County together, channel all the energy that we had county-wide to one specific area. And there's blue parts to that area and there's red parts to the area. So how do we channel all that that we did in this election into one district, speak with one voice, grab one candidate to run there, and push as hard as we can? But we can't leave those folks that showed for the first time that they wanted to, they're a part in this electoral process, in this volunteer process. We've got to keep them, bring them along. And, you know, I believe we make mistakes when we don't invite everyone. And if we may remember, we've got to remember that everybody has something to offer. And I think it's like, if they say no once, are we going to give up on them? No, we need them. We need them to make democracy stronger. So we've got to go at them 3-4 times. And that's one of the things that my union has taught me, that we don't give up. You know, they try to close the door in our faces at those doors. We put our foot in and try to get a few word in. Tori will tell you that we are aggressive. That's what that's what Democrats, now that we have the majority in Orange County, that's what Democrats deserve. They deserve to hear our voices, our values, and we're the only ones that will deliver them. So we've got to be aggressive about it.
Here, I like that. Don't take no for an answer. Anyone who knows me knows that when I ask, it's very hard for me to accept no as for an answer. Tori, question for you. You're a movement builder, and we've seen several movements in the past few years have major moments, like the Black Lives Matter movement, the women's movement with all the women's marches, the immigrants' rights movements have been motivated by a number of bad things, but also great organizing over the past few years. I'm just kind of curious, what do you think all of these movement moments, what do they mean for Democrats?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. You know, I was, because of COVID and the fact I'm, alas, 70 years old, I was not, even though I wanted to be, I did not march in the Black Lives Matter protests. I could hear them all over. And I was very struck by something. I mean, granted, it was other people's experience and looking at it on Facebook and on the news, but I was really struck by well, first of all, the fact that people wore masks and were taking care of each other, that the culture, as was Unite here in Arizona, the culture was caring for each other and not just, you know, like expressing yourself, which has been a problem in social movements. It's just like what I think, rather than how do we build, how do we organize. But what I was really struck by, not just the generational nature of it, the multiracial nature of it, but the fact that voters were being registered at every time, and that it seems to me, and from my young people who are sort of my key informants on this, the ones who are in their 20s and teens, who tell me that there is something happening among youth today. Now we see it in the polls, we saw it in the voter turnout numbers, and I am hoping it's the beginning of something. So if you don't take movement moments and they don't become organizing opportunities, then they just live and die. They may be a great experience for the people who are on the streets during that moment. I've seen that in every social movement I've been involved in. I've seen like times that are just released for the organizers. The choir just has its moment on the streets. But really, it's important that we organize, and not just that we organize, but that we transform that energy from protest to politics, as Bayard Rustin said. And electoral politics, organizing into the vote, maybe into the party. But I want to say, this is the California Democratic Party here, headed up by my friend Rusty. Ada is an official. You guys are involved in that. I'm not really officially involved. I mean, I work for a Democratic supervisor, but there's there is something happening out there that is extra party, but it is connected to the same values that animate the Democratic Party, at least the progressives in the Democratic Party. And so I think it's really about how you meet people where they are, like a good organizer, keep pushing, like Ada talked about. I mean, I learned about canvassing from the Unite Here people and how aggressive and how determined they are in Arizona. But it's not just about voting, but it's about organizing, ongoing organizing. I spoke at 7 resistance groups after the Women's March. There was this flurry of organizations that got started. My group was one of them. I spoke at 7 of them. None of them exist except for my group. That's okay. We saw that after Prop 8 passed. We saw 22 LGBT organizations, Roots of Equality, Equality this, Equality that. None of them existed. It's okay for that flurry of action to happen. Organizing short-term organizations is good, but you have to find long-term organizational homes, and you have to connect to the Democratic Party. It is our vehicle for changing, for social justice. So I think movement, moment, good thing, must result in long-term organizing, has to have a connection to electoral politics.
Right. Well,
Vincent, I know you probably have a question, but maybe I can just sort of respond to the 2 great points that Ada and Tori have made. And I hope I don't get myself in trouble here with the 100+ folks that are here. But I think, in recent years, there has been a cultural movement, and I say a culture movement, that's anti-institutional, anti-organizational, anti-establishment. And I'd probably put establishment in a separate category than institutional or organizational. And the reality is that what Tori is speaking to is the importance of both social movements and the importance of institutions and organizations. She's talking about electoral politics, but in my view, it's even broader than electoral politics. It's organization that protects and preserves the gains made in social movements. You look at social movements in this country have brought about the greatest change for the greatest number of people in our society. And it transitioned to organizations that help take that spark and create a fire that burned for a long, long time to keep a lot of people warm for a long period of time. It was made possible by a social movement, but it was made possible for greater numbers of people, future generations, because of an organization, an institution that helped to protect and preserve that. The right to vote comes about because of a social movement, a culture change, but it's an institution, it's an organization that helps make it available to anybody and everybody, right? And so I think the challenge for an organization like the California Democratic Party, it's been around for 150 years and has seen its ups and downs and is the largest state party in the country. Our challenge is to really take the best of both worlds. How do we ensure that we have the investment made in the infrastructure that helps to magnify the gains that are brought about by social movements? And so how do we link with both the advantages within both spaces to be as nimble as possible to engage the greatest number of people to improve the greatest number of lives? And I think that's our, that's our challenge. There's a reason why tons of resistance groups stood up post 2016. I believe that it's because there had not been the investment in the infrastructure of places like the party at large infrastructure there and a willingness to do that kind of work in new and different ways. Well, a pandemic has kind of forced us to do something in a new and different way. And I think an organizing mindset has helped us to do that. So I think for me, what Tori and Ada are speaking to is really important for all of us within the party to see that we're both part of social movements, but we're also part of the institution and organizations that help amplify and magnify that great success.
Well, that was really the question I'm going to ask you. So you had a mind meld there. I want to get to some of the questions from the audience. First, Penny Kelly asked, as Rusty said, winning legislation, legislators and the president is great, but if we do not enforce the good legislation and make sure the legislators and the president, governor, et cetera, follow through on their policies and promises, it is just words. How do we do this? How do we make them do it? That's a question for any of you.
Well, maybe I could just start and then I'll turn it over to Tori and Ada, which is, and I've said this before, so this is not new. I believe that when we help to elect people, we're getting the first contract. But the reality is, to improve that contract, you got to continue to organize. And if it's like in a workplace, Ada knows this quite well. If you go to the boss and you say, we want Friday off, as the shop steward, you go to the boss and say, I want Friday off. The boss looks over your shoulder and says, well, I don't see the 500 employees with you, so why should I listen to you? Well, then you got to go get the 500 employees and you got to show up and say, we want Friday off. It's a way to balance the power dynamic of that relationship. And so the post-election work is continuing to organize the 500 workers on the shop floor to continue to have that balance of power in the, we'll say, workplace, but in the dynamic that we continue to push for policy changes to improve the contract.
Tori or Ada, do you want to add to that?
I have lots to say, but I want to hear from Ada.
I think I couldn't agree more with what Rusty has said, is flexing the muscle, right? We've got to build that muscle so we can flex it. I believe that, for example, with the city council person or actually with the same boss that Rusty's talking about, if we're not building every single day, the boss knows. The boss knows how strong we are, and they know how weak we are, and they will take advantage of us every step of the way. So if we're not recruiting new committee people, if we're not getting the 10 new people that just started on the job to understand what their rights are, if they're not enforcing and we're not teaching them how to stand up, then we are losing ground every single day. So we've got a responsibility to keep making sure that we protect the gains that we already have by building upon them. And that's what we do. So I don't know how to, add anything else except for that's what it is. We lose ground when we stop building, when we stop recruiting, when we stop pushing.
So I want to be the man for a minute. I work with Sheila Kuehl. I work inside county government. It's a ginormous bureaucracy. And I also want to give the people of Los Angeles, the voters of Los Angeles County, a lot of credit because we ran the table on justice in the election day. I mean, it was extraordinary, really. We got a new DA, we got a new supervisor, we got Measure J by, I don't know what the final numbers are going to be, but significant. And it was really, and we even did well on Prop 15, although it failed in the rest of the state. LA can hold its head high. So, but what I want to say is, I've been at the city, I've been a deputy mayor, I've mostly been outside of government, outside of power policy tables in my life, in my organizing life and advocating life. But I've also been on the inside and I've seen good advocating and organizing, and I've seen really sloppy and ineffective organizing and advocacy. So I guess I want to just put in a plug for kind of training and for best practices. We have enough people who are good organizers and good advocates and good coalition builders now that we don't need to go anywhere else besides our organizations. I'm not going to name names, but I just really believe there's a bench of people who know how to make stuff happen, not only know how to organize on the outside. And labor is really good at some things. Labor's not perfect either. I can do some critiques of labor's advocacy. I can do some critiques of, criminal justice reform advocacy, whatever. I feel like we know how it works, and we know how to do it well, and we know how to, which means that it works and it's effective and it takes root and grows when you're talking about from the inside. So I feel like, I have seen really bad scorched earth policy, left-wing organizing that just makes me want to cringe. And I've seen really awesome, like the Fight for 15, that was really positive, but it didn't come out of the air. It took strategy and timing and pacing and people working across coalitions and trying to peel off pieces of business. I mean, it takes a lot of work to make these big policy changes and then to implement them. And I just want to, give props to the good guys. You know who you are.
Someone try to, oh.
And I should say, to Tori's point, and I'm sure Ada might agree, I'll speak for myself. I've been a part of both of those really smart and strategic advocacy campaigns, and then really sloppy, like where you sit back and like, what are we doing? And Tori makes a great point in that there are good girls and good guys in elected positions. But the difference is, in many cases, how they come to the position, viewing their role as a partner on the inside versus a leader in position to dole out the good stuff, right? I think the best campaigns that I've been a part of is when you had leaders on the inside that were committed to the same values that the people on the outside were committed to. And so, yeah, there was a power differential, but it didn't matter because you were all moving towards the same objective. And so I'm not saying that every elected official has to give us all Fridays off because we showed up with 500 workers and they're always the boss. I want to clarify that.
I like that.
Thank you. I like it too. But I think to Tori's point, Sheila Kuehl, Supervisor Kuehl, is not a pushover, right? She's told me no on more than one occasion, but I've always felt that, there was a common set of values there, and it was about the work and trying to move that forward. And so I do think it is the training internally that Ada was speaking to, of the continual looking for the right talent to step into all these positions. You generally find that talent in the trenches, in a campaign, in a fight, in a scrap. The person who shows up and says, oh, pick me, I'm ready to do X, Y, and Z. Not always, sometimes, but not always the person. You want the quiet leader in the back that everybody turns to and says, what are we going to do here? To give them the training, the skills, and the push, the confidence to step into these kinds of campaigns, end up being great partners. I know that Unite Here is a perfect, does phenomenal work. And they don't take no for an answer, like ever. I don't think I've ever been at a table to tell them what no. They always come back around and push again. And I think that's what it really takes in order to be successful. So.
If I could just add one thing to that, and I don't know if it's going to make me very unpopular, but one of the reasons why I'm all in to campaigns that we develop at Unite Here is because there's a certain discipline, right? It's like we're all going to row in the same direction and we're going to push this forward and we're going to work like crazy, but we're all going to do it together. And the results that it's going to yield are going to be incredible. And it's those ordinary people doing extraordinary things. But there's this sense of discipline, that we all have, especially in Arizona. Look, it wasn't easy, even though, across our industry, right? We were the hardest hit industry. We had, we have, thousands, hundreds of thousands actually of room attendants, dishwashers, that are laid off right now. But they hit the streets of Florida. They hit the streets of Arizona. They hit the streets of Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Nevada, right? And, we early on worked with epidemiologists because we knew that there's no way to move the communities that we've been organizing with for decades if it weren't for, knocking on their door and having some contact with them. So, despite, and Tori will probably, relate to this, despite the pushback that we got from everybody in the world, right? We knew that knocking on doors was going to be the margin of victory. And you know what? It started 4 years ago when Trump got elected. What we decided to do is, I remember we did a union-wide vote to merge our union with Arizona because we wanted to use our resources in Los Angeles to Arizona. And we told our workers, if you're going to come and put in your ballot to vote for this merger, you're also authorizing us to buy you a plane ticket. We thought there would be planes at that time, to buy you a plane ticket to go to Arizona in 100-degree weather. And you know what? We were saying it to them for 3.5 years. We said, you got to do this. Are you going to Arizona? Are you going to Arizona? And everybody was signed up. But when the pandemic hit, it was reorganizing every single person once again, because they were fearful of leaving their families under a pandemic. But you know what? We did not take a no for an answer. And all of you know that we're 11,000 votes ahead right now. We think we know we're gonna keep our lead, right? We know we're gonna win it. It's gonna be close, but for now, it makes so worth every single push that we did. We started there in July. People left their families in July to go. Some of them took their families and their dogs, right? We rented them a space to be social distance. It was even harder than a traditional campaign. A traditional campaign is already super hard, 6 days a week. They each had to knock on 80 doors, 6 days a week, right? And, we contacted 800,000 doors, and we talked to 250,000, voters, and made 3,500,000 calls and identified more than 135,000 votes for Biden Harris. By the end, we had about 400 to 500 people with 30 people on the phones. And I just want to take a moment just to say thank you to the team, Tori Osborne. They kicked butt, Resist and Rise, Seed the Vote, Sunrise Moment, UFCW, SCIU, the Teamsters, UFW, all these great organizations, to Rusty Hicks, to Maria Elena Durazo, Assembly Member Ash Calra was there. But, Ron Herrera helped us tremendously. I'm so proud, that, again, dishwashers and cooks were determined, and they said, we're going to do it. They left it all out, every single sweat, every single time they were worried of whether or not they were going to go out and get COVID. But they did it safely. They believed in the organization. They were disciplined, and we're building for the future. We were already building. This is just an extension of the work we're doing. And now we know that the sky's the limit for us. So 13 years, and, we brought in a whole bunch of folks. And meanwhile, we picked up a U.S. Senate seat with Mark Kelly. We feel really proud of that. We flipped one state seat state House seat and a state Senate. And we got re-elected Betty Guardado, who was a former Century Plaza housekeeper in Los Angeles, once again to the Phoenix City Council. And we won by a landslide, only 70%, right? So thank you, Tori, for all the work. Thank you, Rusty. Thank you for believing and helping us. And we feel really proud of having been part of making that happen.
And past prop or measure 206 or 208 or whatever it was too, the tax that helped education tax on the wealthy.
Well, everyone, hope you enjoyed this conversation. This is not the end of this conversation. As you heard from our chair, that this is a priority, something we definitely want to talk about more. There will be more conversations to help us think bigger as Democrats at how we can be organizing year-round and organizing differently, but also be very focused training to help us to build our skills in the areas as well. I won't let Rusty make any final comments, and then we'll close this event.
More than anything else, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Ada for all your great work in Arizona and Southern California, and for being here today, and certainly my friend Tori. Yes, we got to know one another on the Obama campaign, so it's great to be back here. And thank you for all your work, and Vincent for leading us in a great conversation. This work, I think makes it. It was clear on election night that we still were going to have work to do. We obviously have Georgia to focus on for the next 6-7 weeks or so. And then we continue to build within the party because what do they say? It's 3 days, 5 days, 10 days, whatever, to the first day of the next election. And I don't necessarily think that every election is one on the ballot. It can be in the halls of power, or it can be in the streets of our communities. Both are equally important. So thanks so much, Vincent.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, I won't back down. No, I won't back down. You can stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down. No, I'll stand my ground. Won't be turned around. And I'll keep this world from dragging me down. Gonna stand my ground. And I won't back down. Hey, baby, there ain't no easy way out. Hey, I will stand my ground, and I won't back down. Well, I know what's right. I got just one life in a world that keeps on pushing me